Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
The wife teams up with her friends against her husband, but to what end? Today's story has a similar plot. Enjoy watching it. 3 women sat together at a table for 4 in a quiet restaurant. Sarah, Lisa, and Ashley all worked for the same company, Tanner Logistics. Their boss, Mark Waters, had told them they could take a long lunch. Sarah had worked at Tanner Logistics for about 4 years and had been promoted to executive assistant to Mark 3 months ago. Lisa was Sarah's best friend. They had met during their freshman year in college and had been inseparable ever since. Their husbands, Paul, Sarah's, and Joe, Lisa's, also worked together at Tanner Logistics. It was quite a strange interaction, as Paul and Lisa had known each other since elementary school. Joe had known about Paul when they were in high school, although they went to different schools. However, it wasn't until college, when Joe started dating Lisa, that they officially met. When Paul was in 5th grade, Lisa had moved into a house 2 doors down from his. They were the only children in an aging neighborhood and quickly became best friends. They had childhood crushes on each other, but never at the same time. They never admitted their untimely attractions to each other, so there was never a romantic relationship between them. While in college, Lisa met Joe and introduced him to Paul and her new roommate Sarah. The 4 became an inseparable group. Paul and Lisa realized that, despite their deep affection for each other, their feelings were more fraternal than romantic. They never even flirted with each other. Ashley, the 3rd member of the lunch group, had been a former executive assistant to Mark Waters. 3 months ago, Ashley was promoted to junior executive with Mark's help. She had been instrumental in Sarah taking her place as Mark's current executive assistant. Sarah was eager to follow in Ashley's footsteps. While the 3 women chatted, 2 young women sat at a table on the other side of the thin partition right next to them. One of these women was Sarah's 21-year-old niece, Shannon. Sarah said, "Ashley, this would help your career at Tanner one night and perhaps again in the morning." She laughed. "And you will be provided for." "Yes, sure," Ashley replied. "Even if I wanted to, how could I hide it from Paul?" "That's the thing," Ashley responded. "He doesn't want it to be hidden from Paul." "This is crazy," Lisa interjected. "Sarah, do you really think Paul will be okay with you sleeping with your boss?" At these words, Shannon raised her head from the menu. She only knew one couple named Sarah and Paul. Ashley interrupted before Sarah could respond. "He won't be happy about it, at least not right away, but he'll accept it eventually." Brian accepted, John accepted, Marlon accepted. "You should think about it too, Lisa. Your name has been mentioned several times." While this was happening, Shannon picked up her iPhone and turned on the video recording app. She held the phone so it would film the 3 women, then placed it on the floor so it would record the conversation. "He's a really nice guy," Sarah said. Lisa was silent. "To be honest, he's not that good in bed," Ashley said. "He definitely doesn't have anything above average, but I guarantee the situation will make it exciting." "I don't know, Ash," Sarah said. "Paul is as easy as the next guy, but I just don't see him going for it." Lisa said, "Of course he wouldn't agree if he had a choice." "Look, Sarah," Ashley said, "I know he loves you. He'll give you that one night if he knows it's just one night. This is what you have to do that night," Ashley explained. "You explain what you're doing and that it's just for one night. We'll make sure he can't leave by taking the car keys, and at noon the next day, you go back to him and become his again and spend the night having a night with him while he rebuilds you." The word restores was underlined in quotation marks. "Lisa, you should think about this too. Friday night will be Sarah, Saturday night could be you, and Sunday at noon everything will be back to normal." Lisa was silent. She knew that if this happened, things would never be normal again. "I don't know, Ash," Sarah said. Ashley continued, "We have just under 2 weeks to get this all set up. Paul owes you this one night, and it will help keep you both company. Didn't you say that you were going to start having children? Once you start this, it will be a family forever." Lisa continued to remain silent. "Besides everything else," Ashley added, "make sure you have your Plan B pill. You will show it to Paul before you leave with Mark and make a big deal of it by taking it to him in the morning when you return." "Hey, Ash, Lisa said, are you sure you covered all your bases? What if it gets physical? Aren't you afraid Paul will start a fight? Ashley laughed. Come on, Lisa. Mark is approximately 6 feet 4 inches, and Paul is approximately 5 feet 8 inches. Mark played professional football, for God's sake. Paul won't want to get into a fight. He might start an argument, but it won't get physical. You're probably right about that, Sarah agreed. We've been together for 8 years, and I've never seen him get into a fight or even come close. Hell, he never even argues with me. Lisa didn't say anything but completely disagreed with this assessment. Lisa had known Paul since 5th grade. Although they were never romantically involved, they were best friends, like the brothers and sisters they never had. Lisa had seen Paul fight for a girl twice, both times for her. The first time was in 8th grade. They had gathered with a group of children in a wooded area, as kids do. One of the boys started teasing Lisa and then flicked her bracelet. Paul didn't hear the teasing, but he saw the boy grab her bracelet. Paul pounced on him instantly, knocking the boy down and beating him for about 10 seconds before one of the boy's friends managed to pull Paul away. Paul jumped up and was about to go after the guy who pulled him away when someone said they saw a police car heading their way, and everyone ran away. The second time was a week after the prom. A guy whose parents were out of town decided to throw a party. At the time, Lisa was dating a guy named Tommy from another school. Tommy didn't like Paul because of the way he treated Lisa. When Paul arrived at the party with his friends, Lisa was already there with her boyfriend. Paul walked upstairs to find the bathroom, and as he passed an open bedroom door, he glanced inside and saw Lisa lying on the bed. She seemed to sit on the edge of the bed and then fall on her back. Paul went in and asked if everything was okay. In a very slow voice, she said, "Hi Paul, yes, everything is okay. Tommy was just here and went to get his friends. He said we were going to have fun, not tonight." Paul helped her up and led her downstairs, sitting her on the sofa and giving her some water. When that didn't make her look any better, he took her out into the yard and sat her down on a lounge chair. "Lisa, stay here. I'll go get the guys and take you home." At that moment, her boyfriend's car pulled up to the curb next to the house, and Tommy got out with 3 of his friends. "Hey Tommy!" Paul shouted. "What the hell are you doing with her?" Paul looked at them without emotion. "She feels bad. I'll take her home. I told her to wait upstairs. I'll take her home later." "No, Tommy, I'll take her home now." "Go to hell, idiot. She's my girl, and I'll take her home when I'm ready." Tommy was a burly guy, 6 feet tall, and looked quizzically at Paul, who was 6 inches shorter. Paul just looked at him and said, "I don't think you're her boyfriend anymore, and you and your friends won't go near her." At that moment, there were about 20 kids standing around the 2 guys, standing about 8 feet apart. Lisa was sitting on a garden chair with her head lowered onto the table and her eyes closed. She could hear what was happening but wasn't quite aware of it. "Time for you to go home, little man," Tommy chuckled. "It's time for the big boys to play a little." "You're right, idiot," Paul said. "It's time for me to go, and I'll take Lisa with me." 2 guys from the crowd watching this began to talk quietly to each other, Joe, who studied with Tommy, and Nick, who studied with Paul. They both knew guys from their schools but weren't close friends with them. "Do you think they will fight?" Nick asked. "Seems like it." "Who are you betting on?" "I think it's Paul." "You're crazy. Look at the size difference. Tommy will crush him." "I don't know, man. Look at Tommy. He's playing to the crowd. He thinks it's a joke. He thinks he will crush him. Now look at the other guy. He's focused on Tommy. He doesn't show it, but there's hatred there. If they start fighting, Paul will go crazy. We'll have to drag him away." At this moment, Tommy raised his voice. "That's all, little man. Leave in 5 seconds." Paul knew what would happen next and was tired of waiting. "Go to hell, you coward. This will be the worst day of your life." Tommy chuckled and started walking towards Paul, who wasn't moving. Like most fights between kids, it didn't start with punches. It started when Tommy got close enough and tried to push Paul in the chest with both hands. As Tommy's hands went to Paul's chest, Paul did what his father had taught him. 20 seconds later, Tommy managed to grab Paul again, and they were wrestling on the ground, trying to punch each other. Tommy was already badly beaten, and much of his morale was crushed. Paul suffered a bruise under his left eye, which later turned into a black eye, but no other injuries were visible. Paul broke free again and jumped to his feet. The whole fight was over in a few minutes. Tommy slowly rose to his feet. Paul looked at Tommy's friends and said, "If he comes at me again, I'll punch him in the throat. Tell your boyfriend that Lisa just broke up with him. If he even tries to apologize, I'll find him and break his legs." Tommy's friends were stunned. One of them finally came to his senses and stood between the guys, saying, Okay, it's over. Take your stupid self and get out of here before we call the cops." "Go ahead and call the cops," expletive, Paul replied. "I want to tell them what you and your idiot friends were going to do to Lisa." A couple of kids who didn't like Tommy very much suggested recording everything on video and sending it to Paul. Joe watched from the crowd as Paul and his friends half-carried Lisa to their car and drove off. Although Lisa was nearly unconscious during the fight, she later saw the video and was shocked by how calm and violent Paul acted. The fact that he did this for her strengthened her attachment to him, even though it was platonic. Remembering that time and what she saw in the video, Lisa thought that it would end very badly. Paul would not give up and would not back down. He might get beaten, but he wouldn't give up without a fight. "Sarah, this is a bad idea. Paul won't agree to this." "Don't be so pessimistic. Everything will be fine," Ashley said. "First, as soon as we arrive, take the car keys so he can't leave the resort. Show him your love but don't have intimate with him for a week beforehand. Talk about long-term plans all week, like going on a trip in 2 months, and constantly mention that you're going to start having kids soon. This way, when you return to him the next day, you'll remind him of all your plans for the future. You just have to really have an intimate with him on Saturday night. Tell him Mark wasn't that good and, like him, Paul is much better. Really boost his ego. I'm telling you, he has such a calm personality that it probably won't even be a problem. He might even like it." None of the 3 women noticed the phone lying on the floor near the partition, which was recording the entire conversation on both audio and video. Shannon and her friend could also hear the conversation and were shocked, to say the least. Shannon had been having a secret affair with Paul ever since her aunt started bringing him to family gatherings, and she always believed that her Aunt Sarah was the luckiest woman in the world because she had Paul. Shannon used her friend's phone to send a message to Paul. "Paul, this is Shannon. Call Sarah as soon as possible. Tell her you were just thinking about her. Do not tell her I asked you to do this. Details later." 10 seconds later, she heard the phone ringing and the voice of her Aunt Sarah. "Hey, honey, what's wrong?" "That's sweet. I was thinking about you too. I'm just having lunch with Lisa and Ashley. We're at Angelo's near the mall." "Yeah, I'll be home on time." "Okay, honey. I love you too." "Okay, bye." "That was weird," Sarah said to no one in particular. "Paul almost never calls me during the day, and I'm usually in the office at that time. Maybe it was a sign." "Lisa," said Ashley, "I know you and Paul have known each other for a long time, but I've been married to him for 6 years and we've been together for 8. He won't be happy about this. I understand that, but he won't let it come between us. I know him, and that will really help us in the company." "Lisa," Ashley continued, "I've known Paul for many years. He idolizes Sarah. Not only will he accept it, I actually think you will enjoy it. A lot of men love it, and I'm sure he'll want to make it a permanent part of their marriage." "I don't think I can do this," Sarah said. "It sounds exciting, and I like that it will help us in the company, but I would never." "Never say never," Ashley laughed. Then, turning to Lisa, she said, "It's just intim. It won't replace Paul. I'm telling you, Lisa, you should think about this too. On Saturday night, I don't think so. Joe is all I need." "It's not a matter of necessity," Ashley said. "It's a matter of desire and career opportunity. Suddenly your salary doubles, and the husband you love doesn't have to work so hard. So this also helps my husband. Like I said, it's not like Mark is some macho guy who will take Sarah away from Paul. He's a big guy, but that doesn't mean everything is in proportion, if you know what I mean. Lisa was thinking about what to do. She knew she would have to tell Paul what was going on and was surprised that Sarah thought she could keep it a secret. She was going to tell him what was happening, but the only way to find out was to pretend she was considering it. If she tried to stop it completely, they would probably make plans without her. "Let me think about it," she said, looking at the table. Ashley and Sarah broke into smiles. Part of Ashley's job, unknown to the other two, was to find new conquests for Mark in the company. Sarah was happy because she thought it would be easier to get Paul to accept the situation if Lisa agreed to. At that point, the waiter came over to check on the three women, and Shannon turned off the recording app on her phone. "Come on," she told her friend. "I don't want her to know I was here." She threw a 10 on the table, and they left. Paul was a middle manager at Tanner Logistics. He wasn't in senior management, but he was certainly a rising star in the company. He had been lured away twice, and both times he was persuaded to stay by offering incentives. He liked the job and the people he worked with, so it was easy to convince him to stay. He had a team of subordinates, one of whom was Joe. Paul grew up with Joe's wife, Lisa. When Lisa introduced Paul to Joe while they were in college, Paul took an immediate liking to him, and they became close friends. Joe treated Lisa like a queen, and Paul appreciated that Joe made her happy. When Paul started dating Lisa's roommate, the foursome became almost inseparable. Joe and Lisa returned to town 2 years after Paul started working at Tanner, and both got jobs with the company. Joe was there when Paul got into a fight with Lisa's boyfriend, Tommy, and sometimes joked with him about the worst night of your life comment. Joe didn't really like Sarah, but he was glad that Paul was happy with her. He didn't dislike her, but he did think she was a little self-centered and materialistic. Paul treated her like a queen, and she seemed to increasingly take advantage of it and feel entitled to it. Joe understood Paul's desire to treat her well. Heck, he did the same for Lisa. Lisa, however, didn't take it for granted and treated him the same way. He never discussed it with Paul, but he and Lisa talked about it. Ultimately, it was decided that whatever worked for Paul and Sarah was their business. Although Paul was one step away from senior management, Joe was one step below him. It was clear that when Paul stepped up, Joe would take his place. Joe walked into Paul's office as he was finishing up a conversation with Sarah. "Hey Joe, so what's going on?" "Nothing special." "How's our project?" "Okay," Paul replied, then absent-mindedly added, "That was weird." "What happened?" "Oh, I just got a text from my niece, Shannon, asking me to call my wife. She texted from a number I didn't know and said to just call Sarah and tell her I was thinking about her." "Why is this weird?" "Well, first of all, it was a strange number. Why not from her own phone? Secondly, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and Sarah is still at lunch with Ashley and your wife." Joe shrugged. "I'll see what Lisa says when I see her after work." "Yes, Shannon said she would call me later and tell me." "Do me a favor and don't tell Lisa unless she brings it up." "Okay, sure." "There was something strange in the conversation?" "No, not really. She said she was thinking about me too, that she was with the other two for lunch, and that she loved me. We hung up before you came, so the weirdest thing was that Shannon told you to call her?" "Yeah, I guess. I'll find out later." At 5 p.m., Paul packed his things and left the office. He and Sarah didn't commute to work together because their work hours were an hour apart, and neither of them wanted to sit in the office that extra hour. Paul had barely gotten into the car when there was a loud knock on his side window. Paul winced a little, then started the car with a goofy smile and rolled down the window. "Shannon, are you trying to scare me?" "Sorry," she said, laughing. "Listen, my car is in the Wawa parking lot near your house. Take me there, and we can talk on the way." "Okay." "What's the deal with all this secrecy?" "Paul, you will not believe what I am about to tell you. In case you don't believe me, I have part of it written down." Paul pulled out of the parking lot, and Shannon began to tell her story. When Paul got the gist of what Shannon was saying, he pulled into the Walmart parking lot. "Look, I can tell Sarah that I'm late at work. We need to discuss this now. Let me get this right. What you're saying is that Sarah is planning on taking me on a company retreat in a couple of weeks, and while we're there, she's planning on spending the first night in Mark's room? That's exactly what I'm saying, Paul. Ashley convinced her of this. She tries to convince Lisa to stay with Mark on Saturday night too. She thinks that if Joe sees that you approve of it, he will follow your example. Are you kidding? Are you serious? There's no chance Sarah will do that. I recorded part of their conversation. I take it Sarah doesn't know you were there? I don't think so. I'm sure she would have called me by now to sort the situation out. This must be some kind of joke. Who are they kidding? Well, if you didn't know about this, then it's not a joke for you. Perhaps this is a joke against Lisa. Here, listen to the recording. After the recording played, Paul asked Shannon, "Can you send this to me?" Certainly. A few seconds later, Paul's phone beeped with the sound of an incoming message. I need to talk to Joe. Can you keep this between us for now? I'm not sure what to do. I hope this is some kind of joke. What are you going to do? I mean, I know what you said, but what if she actually does it? We will get divorced. She must understand that I will not tolerate this. Ashley almost convinced her that you would. I assure you I will not. I always thought Mark was a jerk, but I didn't expect this. I wonder how many other couples he set up like that. Paul looked out the windshield, thinking out loud. Ashley mentioned that John and Marlon and Brian got it. Damn. Whatever you need, Paul. I might need a ride back from the Ponos on Friday night. No problem. Take me back to my car and think about what you want to do. I'm torn between dealing with her now and waiting to see if she tries. Listen, if there's anything I can do to help, let me know. If she does, I don't see myself talking to her much, if at all. I think in a divorce you will get me. This was said with a wide smile that did not escape Paul. Yes, we'll see. I hope this is all some misunderstanding, Paul said as Shannon walked the rest of the way to the car in silence, everyone lost in their own thoughts. As Paul dropped Shannon off, Joe walked through the door of his house. He put down his briefcase and walked through the house to the family room in the backyard. Lisa lay in a chair with her hands on her stomach, looking at the ceiling. Hey Lisa, are you okay? No, Joe, I'm not fine. We have a problem, and I don't know what to do about it. Do you want to talk about it? Yes, can we go out into the yard and light a fire in the fire pit? Certainly. Let me change, I'll be out in a minute. Would you like something to drink? Yeah, I could drink 5 Long Island teas, but I'll settle for beer. Joe laughed. Go throw some cardboard and kindling in the fire pit. I'll be out in a minute. 20 minutes later, they were sitting around a small fire, and Lisa told Joe what happened at the restaurant. Joe, you have to know that I would never think of something like that. If she does this, I won't be able to be her friend anymore. Wow, this is a difficult situation. Do you want to hear something funny? Paul received a text from Shannon this afternoon asking him to call Sarah and just tell her he was thinking about her. Oh my God, yes. She was talking to Paul while we were sitting at the table. How did Shannon know to ask him to call her? I don't know. She said she would tell him later. Oh my God, it won't stay hidden even if Paul accepts it. Not only the company will know about it. Lisa, there is absolutely no chance that Paul will accept this. I'm telling you now, if she does this, he will divorce her. I do not know what to do. If I directly tell her to stop, she might just do it behind his back. The only reason I didn't try to reason with her was because I thought if I pretended to be interested, they would keep me in the loop and tell me about their plans. I figure if I can't stop her, at least I can warn Paul and prevent him from being caught off guard and humiliated. I'm proud of you, Lisa. You're a really good friend to Paul. He's like a brother to me. Well, I hope everything works out so you don't have to choose. It's not a matter of choice, dear. If she does this, I simply cannot be her friend, even if they stay together. Well, I have a feeling Paul already knows about this. I'll call him in a little while and see what he thinks. Until then, keep doing what you're doing and let them think you're interested so they can keep you posted. I love you, Joe. I know, honey. I love you too. At the Nelson home, Paul walked through the front door and smelled the aroma of grilled steaks wafting through the open windows. In the backyard, Sarah was heating up canned vegetables on the stove when he entered the kitchen. She heard him and turned around with a big smile. Hey honey, there are steaks on the grill. Dinner will be ready in 10 minutes. It took Paul a lot of effort not to start the proceedings right then and there. He took a deep breath and exhaled. Wow, steaks on the grill. Is this beer in a frozen glass? Okay, did you do something or do you need something? Paul smiled as he said this. No, I'm just doing something nice for my man. They ate dinner on the terrace under an umbrella and exchanged small talk about their day, but the conversation with Ashley didn't come up. Paul was still trying to figure out how to cope with the situation. Later that night, Sarah acted as if she was trying to kill Paul with intimate. Wow, what's this all of a sudden? I don't know. I've been thinking about you since you called me today. You are the sweetest person in the world. I love you so much. Oh really? How much do you love me? Paul smiled. What do you mean? What would you be willing to do for me? I would do anything for you. I like to think that we would do anything for each other. I love you, Sarah. I would do almost anything for you. He hoped she would pick up on the almost and say something like, whatever you would do. But she snuggled into him and fell asleep. The next morning at work, Joe walked into Paul's office as soon as he could and closed the door behind him. Good morning, Paul. I had a very interesting conversation with Lisa last night. Good morning, Joe. I thought so. Did you bring this up yourself, or did she? She did, without my asking. I couldn't wait to tell you. She is very worried about this. Paul took a deep breath. Okay, spit it out. Joe recounted the conversation, including the part about Lisa not being able to be Sarah's friend anymore. She thinks you're a better person. If it was anyone else, I would be worried, Joe said with a smile. I feel the same way about Lisa. I really appreciate your support. Lisa will pretend to be interested too, so they will keep her in the loop. I don't know how long she can do this, it really bothers her. I think she feels like she's cheating on both of us. Joe laughed. Hey, at the end of the day, this is an issue between me and Sarah. I appreciate the help and support, but if it gets awkward, I can handle it myself. It's okay, buddy. Would you like to meet for lunch? Shall we talk again? Sure. How about that little D&D diner on Main, at my expense? Sounds great. See you later. With that, Joe left the office and returned to his smaller office to get to work. Sarah sat at her desk across from Mark's office. Mark called her through the intercom and asked her to bring a cup of coffee. A few minutes later, she entered his office, and he motioned for her to sit down. She placed the coffee on his desk while he was on the phone and sized up her boss. Mark was a big man, approximately 6 feet 4 inches, and weighing about 250 pounds. He had gained weight since Sarah first met him several years ago but was still in good shape. He was the son of the owner. His father, Tim Waters, was the owner of Tanner Logistics. Mark was a very attractive man with dark hair and dark eyes. Sarah knew he was a former professional football player and had always thought he was a good person who seemed caring. Sarah knew that Ashley had received her promotion because of Mark and that other employees had benefited from his influence and generosity. Ever since she became his personal assistant a few months ago, they had become very close. Mark was not married but seemed to have a new girlfriend at every corporate event. Mark had once told Sarah that he did not see himself getting married, didn't want children, and didn't want to be tied down. He saw night as something to be experienced daily and had no intention of staying with one woman. He had a curiosity about different women, and once that curiosity was satisfied, he would move on. Lately, Mark had been persistently pestering Sarah. He said he had curiosity about her, and after they were together once or twice, this curiosity would pass, and they could move on. He promised that after their encounter, he would take care of her the same way he took care of Ashley, and he would also take care of Paul. Although she and Paul were comfortably well off, it would have been really nice if the future owner of the company had taken care of her and her husband. Sarah knew Mark wanted to sleep with her, but she did not want to cheat on Paul. To say that Paul was her everything would be an understatement. She adored him and loved him with all her heart. Ashley was now suggesting that Paul was basically a submissive man who would actually enjoy Sarah being with another man. Sarah was confused. She didn't want to hurt Paul. She knew that anyone who claimed they never had the desire to sleep with someone other than their spouse was lying. People remain faithful in marriage because of the possible consequences, not because there is no attraction. Paul was somewhat of a subordinate personality. He gave her everything she wanted and always deferred to her in everyday matters. He never argued with her and was never angry with her. He never argued with anyone, really. His father was a policeman and treated Paul's mother the same way Paul treated her. She sometimes wondered if Paul's father had ever watched his mother have an intimate with another man. Ever since Ashley told her what Mark wanted to do at the company retreat, she had been feeling nervous. She was certainly attracted to Mark but had no desire to hurt Paul's feelings. Was Ashley right that this would be better for their marriage in the long run? Although Paul would be upset at first, would this be good for them in the long run? Sarah, come back to earth. Sarah was very distracted. Oh, sorry. Don't worry. How does everything look on our schedule for today? Excellent, Mr. Waters. You have a lunch meeting with Mr. Den Houseman at 11:30 and a meeting with Mr. Lightman at 2:30. Other than that, it's an easy day, sir. Sarah, when we're in the office, call me Mark, he said, standing up and looking out the window. Have you thought about leaving? It's less than 2 weeks away. Ashley said she talked to you yesterday. Yeah, I'm not sure I can do that. Of course you can. Look, I won't force you, but everything will be fine, I promise. I thought about that. I'm just not sure my husband will accept it. Sarah, talk to other women. They'll tell you they were all so nervous when we did it. Everything worked out well for them and their husbands. They thought their husbands would be angry, but they weren't. They liked it. It turned them on, and now their intimate lives are better because of it. Mark didn't know if it was true, but he didn't care. He walked up behind Sarah and began massaging her shoulders. Sarah, this will be a one-time event for the two of us. 2 other couples in the same situation wanted to continue, but I said no. I don't want to break up marriages, and I'm not a threat to other people's marriages. I don't want to replace anyone's husband. I just want to help you spice up your intimate life and strengthen our working relationship. It's like the retreat that my father and I have been organizing for decades. I know you feel the same spark that I do, and we need to let it out. At the same time, your husband will get a chance to fulfill his fantasy. I don't know, Mark. He never spoke of such a fantasy. Sarah, think about it. Think about Paul's personality. He is a quiet guy who avoids conflict at all costs. He takes orders without question and never argues. Worst case scenario, he'll say he didn't like it, and you'll never do it again. I mean, we already know we won't do this anymore once he realizes he really likes it. You'll have to find another guy for the role. He wants someone to take control of him. Sarah, when was the last time he raised his voice at you? Ashley had prepared Mark for the dynamic between Sarah and Paul so that he knew Paul was basically subject to Sarah's wishes. He didn't know how this would affect their relationship, but he didn't care. He assumed Paul would accept it, just as Ashley's husband Brian and that weakling Marlon and the other little coward John had. He looked forward to the shock on Paul's face as he led Paul's wife into the master bedroom. I'm just trying to help you, Sarah. This will allow us to release that spark and allow Paul to release his too. Paul needs someone to take control of him. As his wife, it is your responsibility to give him what he needs. That doesn't make him a bad guy, just a guy with different needs than most men. Sarah sighed. Let me think about this a little more. I really need to get back to work, or else everything will pile up on my desk. No problem, honey. Are you having lunch with Ashley and Lisa again? We probably spend a lot of time together. This is good. Ashley is like my right-hand woman, and her recommendations mean a lot when it comes time to promote someone. She was the reason for your promotion to your current position. Yes, I kind of owe her for that. Okay, Mark, I really need to get back to work. With these words, Sarah stood up and headed towards the door. Mark stepped forward and put his hands on her face. "Sarah, everything will be okay. You'll see." He kissed her, then walked around his desk and sat down in his easy chair. Sarah stood still for about 3 seconds, took a deep breath, and then walked out of the office without looking back. Mark sat in his chair with a smile on his face as he watched the beautiful young woman leave his office. He had long and persistently sought her and looked forward to finally achieving his goal. Ashley had told him that Sarah had almost agreed. Although Mark didn't know Sarah's husband personally, he knew about him. He did not work in the same industry as Mark, so Mark was not his direct supervisor. However, since Mark's father owned Tanner Logistics, he was kind of the boss of everyone. Paul was much shorter than Mark, weighing no more than 170 pounds and very inconspicuous. This made Sarah such an attractive target. Like all the husbands Mark had done this to, Paul was quiet and would have swallowed it. Mark was confident that his own size and the fact that his father owned Tanner would intimidate Paul into submission. He hoped that this one would be the first to shed tears. Marlon was close to it. Mark wouldn't bully Paul after that night. He'd take Paul's wife for one night to show Paul who's the alpha. But if the affair continued, he'd keep it a secret. If, on the rare occasion, Paul decided to start a fight, Mark would humiliate him enough to keep him quiet. One day, when the old man finally retires, or better yet, dies, Mark would take over, and these guys would already know and accept him as the alpha male. At lunchtime, Paul and Joe sat in a small diner at a table in the corner. They chose a spot where they could both see the front door and the street through the glass. Joe started the conversation first. "What do you think?" Paul replied, "The way I see it, I have 2 options. The first is to do nothing and see if she goes through with it. If so, then divorce her. The second is to confront her and try to prevent the divorce. Maybe you should give her a hint. Find a movie where the wife cheats with her boss and the husband goes on a shooting spree. You know, a family movie like John Wick." Paul laughed, appreciating his friend's attempt to defuse the situation. "I think something like this might be a good idea. At this point, do you want to divorce her?" "No." "What will be the tipping point?" "I'm not sure. If she plans this until Friday but doesn't follow through, will you leave her?" Paul took a deep breath. "Listen, buddy, I love her. I don't want to lose her, but I can't stay with her if she does this. I think the breaking point would be if she goes into that idiot's bedroom on Friday night. So if we can show her what she has to lose and keep her from it, you'll stay with her?" After a few moments of thought, Paul responded, "Yeah, but it has to be her own insight. If I just confront her and tell her she's caught, she might do it behind my back. I can't live without trusting her." "Got it, Paul. I'm not sure I agree with this approach, but okay. If it were me, I would have already gone after her with my fist. She has to not do this for the right reasons. I don't want to lose her, Joe, but I don't want to keep her if it's just a temporary solution. Okay, let's come up with a plan." Across town, in a small restaurant, Ashley, Sarah, and Lisa were sitting. They ordered food, and after the waitress left, Ashley started talking. "Was this the most exciting night of your life?" Lisa asked. "Without a doubt," Ashley replied. "It was a turning point in my marriage. Our nightlife is incredible now." Lisa continued to push Ashley, but Ashley didn't seem to notice. "So the most exciting night of your life involved humiliating your husband?" "Well, it sounds bad when you say it like that, but Brian eventually got over it." "How do you think this event was for Brian?" Sarah was silent. "Look," Ashley said, "I see where you're going with this. It was necessary. If I had asked Brian beforehand, of course, he would have said no. It had to be forced on him so he could see that it would be good for us. It's like a new dish for a child. They say they don't like it, but after trying it, they realize it's great." "Was Brian humiliated?" "Well, he was a little embarrassed." "So, what made this the most exciting night of your life?" "Your husband's embarrassment." "How many people saw you leave with your boss while your husband sat there?" "All the most exciting nights of my life involve my husband's joy. You know, like the wedding, the first time we made love." "Look," Ashley said, I understand what you're saying. Maybe that was a poor choice of words. I just wanted to say. Lisa looked at Sarah, and Sarah looked back at her. Girls, please stop. I'm going to the bathroom. I'll be right back. Sarah quickly stood up and walked away from the table, leaving the other two. I knew exactly what you meant, Ashley. Let me tell you something. I've known Paul since he was a kid. I know he wouldn't go through with it. If he gets hurt because of this, you won't be able to hide me. Oh, you don't care about Sarah, only about Paul. You have feelings for Paul, right? Does Sarah know? Yes, I have feelings for Paul, and yes, Sarah knows. Lisa, this isn't the first time this has happened. I know what I'm doing. I know Paul's type. I don't want to ruin their marriage. It will be good for both of them, trust me. I'll go check on Sarah, Lisa said evenly. With these words, Lisa stood up, took her purse, and headed to the toilet. As she entered the bathroom, she heard Sarah crying in one of the stalls. Sarah, are you okay? You must think I'm the biggest fool in the world. No, the biggest idiot in the world is waiting for you at work so you can make him coffee. Yeah, well, I'm in second place. Still, no second place is waiting for us at the table. I can't do this to Paul, but he'll get hurt either way. If we go on a retreat, Paul will be embarrassed no matter what happens. You know Mark only chooses wives whose husbands can't stand up to him. What makes you think Paul can't stand up to Mark? Paul is not a fighter. I swear I love him with all my heart, but he is not as aggressive and determined as Mark. He will not fight Mark for me. You know, I've seen Paul fight twice. He's not as weak as you think. I don't think he's a weakling. He's just not a fighter. Mark says. I don't care what Mark says, and you shouldn't either. Both times I saw Paul fight, it was because of me. The first time was in middle school. Some guy was picking on me, and Paul punched him in the face. He loves you, Lisa. I love him too, just like I love you and Joe. What about the second time? We were in high school. I was dating this guy, and we were at a party. My so-called boyfriend slipped something into my drink and was going to share it with his friends. Paul saved me and got into a fight with him. Oh my God. Nobody could have stopped this before Paul got hurt? Well, I didn't see it with my own eyes. I saw the video later. Paul dealt with that guy pretty quickly. It lasted about 5 minutes, but that guy was all beaten up. That guy was your boyfriend? Yes, his name was Tommy. Was he as small as Paul? No, he was quite big, much bigger than Paul, but not as big as Mark. What should I do? Normally, I'd say just forget about it and keep your mouth shut, but that's not an option anymore. Oh God, Paul already knows, right? I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure Ashley and the man aren't the only ones who know. What should I do? Maybe Paul doesn't know, and I can just forget about it? It sounded more like a question. Listen, Sarah, do you want my best advice? Go home tonight and tell Paul what's going on. Ask for forgiveness and do everything you can to show him how much you love him. Ask him what he wants you to do. I sure do. I know other people know what's going on. Jesus, Sarah, Marlon, John, and Brian and their wives at least know. What should I do right now? Okay, that's still a week away. Let's go back to the table, eat our lunch, and as usual, not agree to anything. Then we'll talk some more. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you so much. I don't know what I would do if I lost Paul. Come on, let's go fix our makeup and have lunch. Thank you, Lisa. Please don't let me down. At 2:30 p.m., Paul received a call from his boss asking him to come into his office for a minute. Everything okay, boss? Yes, everything is informal. Okay, I'll be there in a minute. Paul walked up the stairs at the end of the corridor. He avoided the elevators so he could move more. The irony was that his boss's office, which Paul hoped to get in the future, was directly above his own. The door to the office was open, so Paul entered. Hey, Marlon, what's wrong? Good afternoon, Paul. Mark Waters was just here, and he wanted to know if you're still going to the retreat next week. That's interesting. Why does Mark care if I go? Well, your wife works for him, and he likes you. He really hopes you'll be there. Marlon, is this your way of telling me that I have no choice but to go? Well, there will be a lot of important people there, including some of our clients. Your presence could be very beneficial for your career. Plus, most of the guests will be staying in the cabins, while a select group will be staying in the main building. Has going to retreats helped your career, Marlon? Marlon hesitated, then looked down at his desk. Yes. Who else will be staying in the main building with us? Brian and Ashley, John and his wife Megan, and Joe and Lisa. Why Joe and Lisa? Well, I think if everything goes well at the retreat, you could move up the corporate ladder. I think Mark wants to get a sense of what kind of person Joe is. Well, I'm still planning on going, but I'm not sure about Sarah. Paul teased Marlon about Sarah. He noticed that all 3 guys mentioned in Shannon's post were also mentioned by Marlon. What? Why can't Sarah go? Well, I'm not sure. I think I heard her talking about other plans. Why is it important that she be there? After all, she's just a secretary, right? Well, it's a family retreat. It's important that everyone is there. You know, everyone socializes and gets to know each other's families. And besides, she might have a chance for a promotion. If I didn't know better, Marlon, I'd think you wanted her there more than I do. Paul chuckled. No, Marlon responded quickly. I want you both there. It'll be good for morale. Hey, Marlon, wasn't Ashley Suski Mark's personal assistant before Sarah took over? Yeah. What does her husband do? He works in the IT department. I see. Just curious. Every time Paul made eye contact with Marlon, Marlon looked down at his desk. Marlon, what do you think of Mark? What do you mean? Well, he works in the administrative department, while we work in research and development. Why did he come to you, my boss, to make sure I go to this retreat, rather than going to Sarah, who works for him and sits 20 feet away? Why is there so much pressure on me to go? I don't know. Mark is a good guy. He keeps his promises. That's good to hear. What promises could he have made to you and me? Well, his dad owns the company, and I'm guessing Mark will take over someday. Once he takes over, he'll be able to really take care of us. What if he doesn't lead the company? Marlon turned slightly pale. Why wouldn't he want to lead? Of course, he will. Who wouldn't want to lead this company? Sometimes it's not a matter of desire, Marlon. Sometimes it's a matter of necessity. Ask yourself if you think Waters is capable of leading this company, and then ask yourself if old man Waters knows. But Mark is his son. Mark is a loser. Paul started to get angry. If we all know he's a loser, I'd guess the old man knows it too. Be careful messing with the wrong horse, Marlon. Marlon sat in silence, and it was an awkward moment. So, are you going to the retreat? You know what? I wouldn't miss it for the world. I'll be there. Okay, great. That's all I have. Okay, boss. We'll talk later. Paul sarcastically emphasized the word boss as he left the office. He had no doubt that Mark had done to Marlon what he wanted to do to him. The situation put a lot of pressure on Paul. He loved his wife with all his heart, but he chose his words very carefully when he told her that he would do almost anything for her. Letting her take a lover was not on that list. Paul knew that if this happened, if she went through with it, he wouldn't be able to stay with her. He wasn't ready to share. He also knew that she had to make the decision not to do this. It had to come from her. If he confronted her and forced her to abandon the plan, he would always wonder if she would do it behind his back. Just before Paul left work that day, he received a text from Lisa. I think Sarah had an epiphany. Paul drove home with the radio off, lost in thought. When he pulled up to the house, he saw Sarah's car in the driveway. He got out of the car and slowly walked to the front door. Quietly opening it, he wasn't trying to be quiet, he was just in that mood. He placed his briefcase by the door and headed towards the back of the house. When he walked into the living room at the back of the house, there were glass French doors leading out to the backyard patio. To his right was a long sofa facing the doors. There were armchairs at both ends of the sofa facing each other, and opposite the sofa was a small love seat. Sarah sat in the middle of the sofa, covering her face with her hands and crying quietly. "Sarah, are you okay?" Sarah raised her head, looked out the back door for a few seconds, took a deep breath, and then looked at Paul. Her eyes were red and swollen, her skin was blotchy, and she was in a terrible state. "Paul, I did something terrible. I need to confess. I don't even know how to say it." She fell silent and began to sob. Paul, of course, knew what she was talking about but stood silently. His heart ached for her emotional state, but he wasn't going to make it easy. He needed it to leave an indelible mark on her psyche. "Paul, She stopped and took another deep breath. "Did you cheat on me?" "No," she answered immediately. Sarah stood up and walked over to Paul, kneeling in front of him. She wrapped her arms around his waist and pressed her cheek against his stomach like a child. "Paul, Mark Waters wants me to cheat on you with him for one night at the retreat. I was actually thinking about it until Lisa brought me to my senses." Her face was pressed to his stomach. "Did she tell you not to do it?" "No, she made me realize it myself. When Ashley said it would be the most exciting night of my life, as well as hers, Lisa said that all her most exciting nights never involved humiliating Joe. When she said that, I realized what I was thinking. I never meant to hurt you, Paul. They told me that you..." "Stop a second. Let's sit on the couch and figure this all out. I want you to tell me everything that happened. I need you to tell me everything that's happened since you started working directly for Waters." He helped her up and followed her to the couch. She sat in the middle facing the French doors, and Paul sat to her left. "Paul, looking back on the last few months, I feel like a complete fool. I let this guy get into my mind and hurt the most important person in my life. I love you, Paul, more than you know, and I will do everything I can to make things right." Paul kissed the back of her left hand. "I love you too, Sarah. Tell me what happened." Sarah spent the next hour telling Paul about the last 3 months of working with Mark. She hadn't thought about it before, but now she began to understand how he had gradually gained her trust. How he shared his problems with her and started intimate conversations. Over time, their conversations became more and more risque. Mark never criticized Paul directly but always pointed out how quiet, calm, and unnoticeable Paul was. He convinced Sarah that Paul was submissive by nature and that he needed Sarah to dominate him. Paul listened to the whole story, and when Sarah fell silent, he looked at the floor, then out the back door into the yard. "Sarah, if I ever gave you the impression that I was some kind of subordinate, it was not intentional, I assure you. If you had gone through with it, I would have divorced you. I've been struggling with what to do this whole time. What did you know about this, and didn't say anything?" "No." Sarah stared straight ahead for a moment. Paul noticed the anger brewing inside her. "You were going to let me." "Don't take an aggressive tone with me, Sarah. You were actually contemplating cheating on me and humiliating me, and your excuse was that I'm a good guy who doesn't like to fight, and that makes me a coward and gives you the right to cheat?" Sarah went limp in front of him. "I'm sorry, Paul. Mark and Ashley convinced me that you would not only go along with this but also enjoy it. Out of curiosity, what made you come to your senses?" "Lisa. The 3 of us were having dinner today, and Ashley started talking about it again. When Ashley said it would be the most exciting night of her life, Lisa said the most exciting night of her life was when she married Joe. It dawned on me that if this really was going to be the most exciting night of my life, it could also be the worst night of yours. It would be one thing if you wanted it and we planned it together, but throwing it at you out of the blue would be terrible for you. Doing this in front of all these people would be devastating. Then I realized that I could cause the worst day of your life, and Mark and Ashley would enjoy it all for their sick pleasure. When I realized that, I almost did. I did. I went to the bathroom and threw up. Lisa saved me. Sarah, make no mistake about it. If you had tried to go through with your plan, we would have gotten divorced. I would never have allowed your night of passion to happen, and Mark would have had the worst night of his life. I believe you, dear. Thank God for Lisa. What were you planning? Well, I had a plan. Maybe I can save part of it. Let me think about it. For now, I want you to look unsure. Tell Mark you're not sure if you can go through with it, but don't say no. Let me think. I'd really like to teach this man a lesson. Sarah, when this is all over, I might have to look for another job. It's okay, honey. Other companies have tried to poach you before. We can handle it. Paul, I don't want you to fight him. I don't want to fight him either if I can avoid it. You understand that you will have to look for another job too? I know. I won't be able to work with him after this anyway. Paul needed to talk to someone outside. He called an old friend. Bobby, it's Paul. Do you have a minute? Wow, this is serious. You didn't call me a fifth place or a freak, Bobby laughed. Paul smiled to himself. He and Bobby had known each other for a long time and were always making fun of each other. Yeah, Bobby, this is pretty serious. I need you to talk to someone for me. 2 days later, Tim Waters, owner of Tanner Logistics, received an email. It only said, "The future of your company is at risk." It was impossible to reply to the letter. On Friday morning, another letter appeared. Your company is in danger. You have someone working who will destroy it. If you want to discuss this, I will be at Bethel Mill Park tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. by the lake. Tim stared at the screen and thought, why not? It seemed highly unlikely to him that any of his employees would intentionally harm Tanner Logistics, but his curiosity was piqued. It was impossible to reply to the letter. Tim was at Bethel Mill Park on Saturday morning, sitting on a bench by the lake at 8:50. Bobby came and sat next to him. Bobby extended his hand. Mr. Waters, nice to meet you. Tim shook his hand and replied, who are you? Just a guy helping a friend. Is this whole spy thing really necessary? No, but whatever. The weather is great, and we're both outdoors. True, Tim laughed. Okay, why are we here at this fine hour of the morning? We're talking about your son, Mark. Mark a loser? Wow, no need to cut corners. Tell it like it is. What has he done now? Well, sir, it seems that Mark has a penchant for cheating with married women and humiliating their husbands. He did this to you? No. Then why is this important to me? Because he does this to men who work for you. Are you saying he sleeps with my employees' wives? Yes, sir. You don't work for me. Why are you here? My friend works for you, and he likes his job. He likes his job but won't stay if it's intolerable. Why don't I talk to him? Like I said, he likes his job and you, but you're the father of the same loser. If he sits here and you don't believe him, he better quit right away. You mean you didn't know that he cheats with married women in your company? Like I said, this man is a loser. It doesn't surprise me. Can you tell me about the specific situation with this anonymous employee? Is Mark having an affair with this man's wife? Not yet, but the point is that he's going to be caught off guard. I'll talk to Mark today. The thing is, my friend doesn't want you to get involved. He wants to know what your long-term plans are for Mark. If Mark really is going to take over Tanner, like he says he is, my friend will handle it and then leave. He just needs to know where you stand. In what sense? Look, Mr. Waters, let's stop beating around the bush. Next week at your retreat, your son will try to seduce this guy's wife and humiliate him in the process. My friend won't let that happen. At the end of the evening, will he have to look for a new job? If that's the case, he might skip the retreat and start looking for a new job now. Once Friday starts, he won't be very polite to your son. If your plan is to leave the company to Mark, my friend would like to know this now so he can plan his future. He might find something before next Friday. What does he want from me? Confidence that his job will be safe even if he fights with your son. I don't condone violence. Tell him to come to me with proof of what Mark is doing, and I'll deal with it. That sounds great. Should he just walk into your office and complain like a coward? What you may not realize is that if he goes to you, you will punish Mark, and my friend's name will become known. When Mark takes over the company, my friend will be finished. Tim pulled out his phone. What's your number? I'll send you mine, and you can give it to your friend. Tell him to call me. I'd really like to work this out. At 2 p.m., Tim's phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Tim Waters speaking. Mr. Waters, this is Paul Nelson. I got your number from a friend regarding a situation I'm facing. Well, Mr. Nelson, this is a really sticky situation for me, as you can probably imagine. There was silence on the other end of the phone. I am, of course, concerned about the well-being of all my employees. I understand that an inappropriate relationship may be developing between Mark and your wife. I definitely do not want to lose you as an employee, Mr. Nelson. I have plans for you. I will figure out a way to defuse this. Mr. Waters, the first thing you need to do is decide which direction you want to take your company. I assure you, Mr. Waters, you need to decide what is more important to you, your company and its reputation or your son's intimate life. With all due respect, sir, this will not end well for either of us, at least in the short term. Regardless of what you say or do, when this comes out, either I or you will get hurt. If you warn him in advance, I will quit after Friday. I will never be able to work in a company where you will be my boss, my wife's boss. There was an awkward silence on the line. You know what, Mr. Waters, I wanted to deal with your idiot son face to face, but at the moment that doesn't seem to be an option. I'll leave my resignation letter on Marlon's desk on Monday. Paul, wait a minute. I understand your situation. I really do. Frankly, Mark is a disgrace to me, Mr. Waters. He's already done this to at least 3 or 4 other guys. I'm surprised you weren't told this sooner. He's the cancer of your company. Why should I stay at Tanner knowing that in a few years he'll lead it and then I'll have to quit? What's your solution, Paul? Catch him in the act and fire him. Cut out the cancer. After 5 seconds of silence, Tim answered, let's meet in person. Lunch at Angelo's on Monday at 12:30. Sounds good, Mr. Waters. Just the 2 of us, right? Yes. See you. Paul pressed end call and turned to his wife. We're meeting for lunch on Monday at Angelo's. If you go to lunch, make sure you choose another place. Okay, she answered quietly. When you talk to the man, be vague. Let him by the nose. He has to believe that it will happen even if you don't say you agree. If he records the conversation, I don't want it to turn out later that you're up to something. Then she agreed, fine. Sarah was still afraid that this could create an irreparable rift between her and Paul. Paul took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Look, honey, I really want us to get through this. For that to happen, I need to make sure I can trust you. I understand. I will never do anything again to make you doubt whether you can trust me. I love you, Paul. When Paul entered the restaurant, he saw Tim Waters sitting in a booth in the back corner of the dining area. As he approached, Tim stood up and extended his hand to Paul. Paul shook it, and they both sat down. The waitress came up, took their lunch order, and left them alone. Mr. Waters, we don't have to drag this out. I have my letter of resignation with me, and we can. Paul, please. First of all, call me Tim. Secondly, I will not accept any resignation letter from you. You're much more valuable to Tanner than Mark. You're right, Paul. Mark is a cancerous tumor. I thought about this a lot over the weekend. I spoiled him since childhood to please his mother. I see. If what you say is true and we can prove it, he will leave. What exactly is going on, and what are you going to do? Well, Mark is going to spend the night with my wife on Friday night at the retreat. I understand you'll be on the West Coast? Yes. I don't like missing retreats, but I have planned this meeting for a long time. What is going to happen? Well, Mark invited 5 or 6 couples to stay in the main house with him. As far as I understand, with the exception of 1 couple, he has already done this with all the other couples who will be staying in the main house. He's been working on my wife for months now, trying to get her to let this happen. Apparently, Ashley Seski is his accomplice and is filling Sarah's head with all sorts of nonsense about how she and I will be provided for, and so on. Oh my God, this is a nightmare. Incredible, Tim muttered. At some point, probably around 9 or 10 p.m., Mark will go to his room for the night, and my wife will go with him, or so he thinks. I'll stay in the main room with the other couples, humiliated. At least that's what he thinks. Why does he think she'll agree to this? He promised her a promotion and a raise for both of us. He said that as soon as he took over leadership, both of us would be provided for. He also promised career stagnation if she did not agree. Think about Ashley Seski. Do you know what you're going to do? Well, around 8:45, I'll propose a toast, explain that I'm not going to let this happen, and find a way to write it down. Wait, isn't there a CCTV system in the main house? Yes, I have it. It is equipped with an audio and video system controlled from the security room in the basement of the main house. I imagine Mark will ask Norman to turn it off, but he might want to record it. Tim looked at Paul and said, "You realize this is going to be a blow to Tanner's reputation, right? Anyway, it will happen. Everything will come out. At the risk of sounding like a jerk, you hired him knowing that he was, in your words, a weirdo. I'm not going to meet with you and them in some office and come to an understanding. To hell with it, everything will come out. I don't condone fighting. I won't look for a fight, but if he starts, I won't back down. Any ideas? Maybe we'll see you on Wednesday. I'll tell you one thing, I don't want to lose you, Paul. If Mark really tries this, he'll leave. We'll see, Mr. Waters. Forgive me for my skepticism, but he is your son." "Yes." "Well, I understand. If I'm going to fire him, I'll need irrefutable evidence. I will need to satisfy the board of directors, and some may be on his side. Plus, I will have a wife who will be furious. Respectfully, sir, my problems seem a little bigger." "I understand. We'll talk on Wednesday." The week passed slowly for Paul. Both Brian and John came to him wondering if he would go on Friday. He was disgusted with them. Paul pretended not to know what they were up to, and they pretended they were just wondering who they were going to spend the night with in the main house. Mark and Ashley separately put a lot of pressure on Sarah to make sure she went. Ashley was a little worried about Sarah's insecure behavior, but Mark brushed it off. "I just need her to go," Mark said. "Once she's there, she won't be able to say no. Have women ever refused you? Once or twice, but once she's in the moment, she can't say no. You'll see." At 3 p.m. on Friday, Derek arrived at the main house and went straight to the master's suite. He arrived 3 hours earlier than the others were expected to, but he did it because he was told to. At least he wasn't locked in a dog cage this time. He knew he would be locked in the room until Mark's new came into the room. Damn it, he could be stuck in this room all weekend. Mark told him to be there by 4 o'clock, to stay in the room, and not make a sound. At 5 p.m., Mark arrived and immediately went to the control room. He confirmed with Norman, the head of security, that the cameras in the main house were set up the way he wanted. The cameras in the living room were silent. He told Norman he could leave at 8 p.m. "I assure you, Mr. Waters, the cameras are set up exactly as specified," Norman said. Mark headed to the master's suite to prepare for a night of excitement. At 6 p.m., the guests began to arrive, and by 7 p.m., everyone was already there. Most guests were accommodated in individual cottages scattered throughout the resort. The exception was the small number of people who stayed in the main house. Mark was not a fan of these corporate retreats. He believed that an employee's salary should be enough motivation to work hard. If it weren't for the affair with Paul's wife in Tim's absence, he would have missed this retreat. Since he was here anyway, he pretended to be a hospitable host and took as much credit as possible for, well, everything. There weren't many events planned for the evening. First, there would be a meeting at the pavilion where Mark would greet everyone on behalf of his father and Tanner Logistics. Light snacks and drinks would be served. Then a fire would be lit in the huge fire pit, and everyone would retire to their cottages for the night. Paul, Sarah, Joe, and Lisa arrived together at 6:30 p.m. Paul parked in the small lot next to the main house, and the four of them grabbed their bags and went inside. Knowing what they knew, neither of them expected to stay the night, let alone the whole weekend, but they brought enough things with them just in case. Right by the front door, there was a small table with cards indicating the room assignments. Mark would be in the master's suite on the top floor of the south wing of the house, Paul and Sarah on one side, Joe and Lisa on the other. When Paul and Sarah put their bags in the room, they could clearly hear the TV in Mark's room. "These walls look like they're made of paper," Paul remarked. "Yes," Sarah replied. "I guess you wanted me to hear you two doing this all night." Paul smiled as he said this. "I think I'm going to be sick," Sarah said. The thought of what she was up to and the reality of her being here made her feel nauseous. "Don't worry, sweetie. It'll all be over soon anyway." All four left the house and headed to the pavilion, where they began communicating with colleagues. Ashley approached them, and after greeting everyone, she discreetly asked Sarah if she had collected the car keys from Paul. "The keys are fine," Sarah replied. At 7:30 p.m., the clink of glasses was heard, attracting the attention of everyone present, and Mark appeared behind the podium installed at one end of the pavilion. "Friends," Mark began, "on behalf of my father and Tanner Logistics, welcome to our 6-month corporate retreat. Our goal, of course, is to strengthen our team and become one big happy family." Paul leaned over and whispered in Sarah's ear, "Looks like there's some kind of incest going on here." Mark noticed that Sarah smiled at Paul's comment and, misinterpreting her intentions, smiled back. "Please excuse my dad's absence. He is on the West Coast on business and is very disappointed he couldn't be here this weekend. These retreats are very important to him, and he believes they are one of the reasons for our success." Mark continued talking for another 15 minutes without saying anything specific other than implying that the retreat was largely his doing. Finally, he wished everyone a pleasant evening and left to light applause. At 8 p.m., Mark approached the four with a big smile. "Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you." After a few seconds of awkward silence, Mark continued, "I hope you are all settled and safely. How about we meet here around 8:45 p.m. for a drink? Let's have a little party." "Of course," Paul replied, "but Sarah and I can't stay out late. We have to get up early." "Don't worry," Mark chuckled. "We'll all go to bed early enough." With that, he turned and joined the conversation with the nearest group. Sarah waited until Mark was a safe distance away, then said, "Paul, should we just leave?" "We could, but it wouldn't be as fun." "Believe me, sweetie, everything will be fine." Paul took out his phone and sent a message. As Mark left, he looked at his watch, apologized to the group he was talking to, and headed back to the main house. He walked into the master's suite and told Derek to lay out his clothes so he could change after a quick shower. He was in and out of the shower in just a few minutes, quickly getting dressed in the clothes Derek had prepared. He walked over to the table in the corner of the room and looked at the monitor. The monitor showed surveillance cameras that were not part of the resort's main system. These cameras had both video and audio capabilities and were installed in the bedrooms. Mark liked to watch the men whose wives he seduced. He enjoyed watching them get nervous and wander back and forth. Cameras were also installed in the living room, dining room, and hallway. This system did not monitor the outside of the house or areas Mark considered unnecessary. The main security system did that. Mark could hear two couples in the adjacent rooms talking. The walls were thin and not soundproof. Mark had rebuilt the walls using thinner drywall and smaller studs to make them as thin as possible. He wanted the occupants to be able to hear what was going on in his room. At 8:45 p.m., Mark went downstairs to get ready. Initially, he thought of seating everyone at a large dining table. If he could be sure he could arrange it so that Sarah was sitting next to him and Paul was locked at the far end of the table, he would have done so. Sitting in the living room wasn't conducive to this arrangement either, but when the time came to claim Sarah for the night, it would be very dramatic to see her leave her husband and come to him. The resort was purchased by Tanner Logistics 10 years ago and was used by the company's employees. The main house was actually a mansion. In the central part, there was a foyer, several small living rooms, and a large living room. Behind the living room was a large kitchen, and beyond that was a large banquet room. On one side of the kitchen, there was a large dining room with a long table that could seat 14 people. On either side of the living room were two wings with 2 floors containing separate bedrooms. Each level had 5 bedrooms, 2 on each wall and 1 large room at the end. The exception was the south wing of the top floor, where the master suite was located. It replaced the end room and 2 bedrooms, so there were only 3 rooms in that hallway. Stairs from the upper floors led down to the living room. The basement was accessible from the kitchen and from the street and contained the control room for the complex, storage areas for food, and other necessary items for the main house. There was also an apartment that could be used as a bomb shelter or safe room and could accommodate up to 10 people. Sometimes the control room and kitchen staff stayed there when they had to spend the night at the resort. 3 kitchen workers were present over the weekend to prepare meals for those who remained in the main house. The rest of the guests at the resort ate in the dining room of the pavilion. Snacks for the evening were prepared and left in the kitchen. At 9 p.m., everyone who remained in the main house gathered in the living room and took seats on the soft furniture around several coffee tables. In attendance were Paul and Sarah, Joe and Lisa, Brian and Ashley, John and Megan, and Marlon and Jennifer. Mark was sitting on the couch alone, and Derek was in the master's suite, which no one but Mark knew about. On one side of the room, there was a fully stocked bar and a refrigerator stocked with various brands of beer. Mark began, "Good evening, everyone. I hope everyone found their rooms." There was a slight murmur of agreement. Paul was silent and stared at Mark. "I took the liberty of ordering champagne for everyone, and I want to propose a toast," Mark said. It was obvious that Paul, Sarah, Joe, and Lisa had not taken their glasses. Mark suggested that the wives follow their husband's example and said, "Paul, Joe, please take a glass." "It's okay, Mark," Paul said. "I already have a drink." "Go ahead and make your toast." "Oh, okay, sure. Here's to a great retreat weekend, to the time spent in good company, and to team building in our company, during which we get to know each other and ourselves better." Mark noticed that Paul hadn't taken a sip from his glass. "Anyone else want to make a toast?" Paul asked. "Of course," Paul said, standing up with his drink in hand. "We sacrificed everything for Tanner Logistics, knowing that the company's success meant success for each of us. For the rewards to be worth the sacrifices, and for an early night." Mark started to smile and looked at Paul. "Wow, I couldn't have said it better. You're right, Paul. We sacrifice everything, but it always pays off." No one noticed Derek standing in the shadows at the top of the stairs, looking up at Mark with adoration. "Mark," Paul continued, "we have what could be considered a tradition at Tanner. In the near future, my father will retire, and I will take over the management of the company. When that happens, I need to know that I can fully count on the loyalty of my employees." "Well, Paul, this is it," Paul thought to himself. "Has anyone already hinted at a lack of loyalty to the company?" "No, Paul, not yet. I haven't heard that Tim is retiring. What's the timeline for that?" Mark was a little surprised that Paul used the name Tim, but continued, "We haven't set a date yet, but it will happen soon. When this happens, big changes will occur. Those who show loyalty and cooperation will be richly rewarded. Those who do not show up will look for a new job without a recommendation." "Wow, that sounds threatening," Paul said. "I take it, since I'm in the main house and not in one of the cottages, that means I'm okay?" "Funny you should ask that, Paul. Since Sarah began working under my leadership, we have become very close," Mark replied. "This is true," Paul said, more as a statement than a question. He looked around at the others. Marlon, John, and Brian looked at the floor in front of them. Megan and Jennifer looked around nervously, while Ashley looked at Paul with a smirk on her face. "Yes, Paul, it is. Sarah and I made a decision. I want you to know that although this may be a little uncomfortable for you, you won't be the first to experience this," Mark continued. "Sarah and I will spend the night together in my bedroom." Knowing this was coming, Paul couldn't help but laugh. "Sorry, Mark, but it will not happen." "Yes, Paul, it will. In a few minutes, Sarah and I will retire to my bedroom. She will spend the night with me and return to you at noon tomorrow. What if I say no?" "You can say no if you want, but it will still happen. Look, Paul, we both, hell, everyone here knows what's going to happen. You're a good guy, it doesn't make you a bad guy. I'll just borrow Sarah for the night so we can both satisfy our mutual attraction and move on. Tell me, Mark, did you have the same agreement with the wives of everyone present here?" "Well, it happened with 3. This showed me how loyal these men were to me. They and you will be very well provided for when the old man finally gets out of the way. I value loyalty above all else. Let me get this right. To keep my job, do I have to let you sleep with my wife? There's no need to be rude in front of the ladies, Paul. Look, although your job doesn't depend entirely on Sarah spending the night with me. Great, then we can agree that this won't happen. You can take the wife of one of these other guys, and Sarah and I will go to our room alone. Mark stood up with a grin on his face. This was almost his favorite moment, an exchange where the husband tries to find a way to keep his wife from leaving with him. This had not happened yet and would not happen today. Paul, let's not make this any more difficult than it needs to be. Are you telling me these guys let you have their wives to keep their jobs? Sorry, this job is not that important to me, so I have to say no. You don't understand, Paul. It's not your decision. This whole conversation is just a courtesy. Sarah knows how beneficial this will be for both of you, and we have already decided. No, I still have to say no. This was Mark's absolute favorite moment, the moment when the wife leaves her husband. Sarah, please stand up. Sarah stood up, looking at Mark. Sarah, come here and sit next to me on this couch, Mark said. Sarah, Paul said, looking at Mark, sit down. Sarah sat back down. Sarah, get up and come here now, Mark commanded. Sarah sat silently next to Paul. Well, Mark, my wife doesn't seem interested. I guess you should have brought your own girlfriend. Sarah, if you value your work and your husband's work, you will come here now. Sorry, I've been thinking about this a lot, and there's no way I'm giving up Paul for you, Sarah said. Ashley couldn't hold it in anymore. Sarah, we talked about this. You're not giving up on Paul. It's only for one night. Not only will Paul accept it, but he will find that he likes it. Shut up, Ashley. When was the last time you talked to Paul? Everyone looked at Lisa with open mouths. If it turns out that Paul doesn't accept it and doesn't like it, you will restore their marriage. Just because everyone knows Brian doesn't care about your partying doesn't mean everyone is like that. Brian stood up and looked at Ashley. You know what, Ash, I've had enough. We're done. You're not worth it. With that, Brian headed toward their room, and Ashley begged him to wait and talk. At that moment, Mark hit one of the coffee tables with his hand. Everything is not going as it should have been. Sarah, last chance. You spend the night with me and keep your job and Paul's job, and have the best intimate of your life, or you stay with mediocre Paul and move your things out of the office on Monday. Paul was smiling now. You know what, idiot, your stupidity really amazes me. You're telling all this knowing that there are cameras recording everything? Do you think your father will allow this? My father is a hopeless dinosaur. As for those cameras, don't you think I've already turned them off? Go ahead, tell the old man. It's your word against mine, and I have loyal people right here who will swear you're lying. The only smart thing my father does is trust me. At that moment, Tim Waters entered the living room from the kitchen. Mark, I'll keep it short. You're fired. Don't try to return to the office, your pass is no longer valid. This hopeless dinosaur can replace you in a day. I'm tired of dragging you down. Find yourself a job where you have to work. And by the way, I talked to Norman 3 days ago and made sure that all these cameras are working and recording right now. Get out. With that, Tim Waters turned and returned to the kitchen. Mark was stunned and looked at where Tim had been standing. After a few awkward seconds, Paul stood up and said, Well, that was fun. I think it's time for Sarah and me to go to bed. Mark started yelling at Paul, You son of a. I'll kill you, and rushed at him. Paul wasn't very optimistic about this fight. Mark was 20 centimeters taller and 25 kilograms heavier, and was seriously angry. As Mark charged at Paul, Joe kicked the coffee table into Mark's path. Mark tripped over the table, fell on his shoulder, and rolled onto his back. Paul took the opportunity to jump on Mark and start punching him in the face. After a few good hits, Mark managed to push Paul off. Paul jumped to his feet, and Mark stood up as well. The men stared at each other, and Mark was preparing to charge again when a bloody scream was heard behind Paul. Paul turned around, and Mark took the opportunity to punch him in the face, causing him to spin around. As Paul turned from the force of the blow, he saw Derek running at him with a knife from the kitchen, which he plunged into Paul's chest. Time seemed to stand still for a few seconds before Paul fell to his knees. Suddenly, there was an explosion of noise. Sarah and Lisa screamed. Joe attacked Derek, grabbed the knife, and threw it aside. John knelt next to Paul, who was now lying on his back. Sarah ran to him and held his head in her lap, sobbing. Brian ran down the stairs after hearing the screams, hoping to see Mark get what he deserved. John took control of the situation. Marlon, call 911. Megan, listen to me, find the cling film. If you can't find it, grab a big bag of chips and bring it here fast. Brian, find some strong tape, duct tape or packing tape. Lisa, find some scissors or a knife to cut the shirt, but not the one that hit Paul. Listen to me, you can do it. Trust me, I've been through this before. Just try to relax and stay with us. The ambulance will be here in 15 minutes. Marlon said. Just then, they heard the helicopter start up to take Tim Waters to the airport. Joe, stop that helicopter. John said. Joe ran through the kitchen to the back of the house before John could finish. Marlon, find a sheet or blanket so we can move him. Marlon ran towards the bedroom. At this point, Megan returned with a large bag of chips and Lisa with a large kitchen knife. Open the bag and pour out all the chips, John instructed. Lisa cut Paul's shirt so they could get to his chest. She quickly cut off the buttons and pulled his shirt aside. John took an empty bag of chips, flattened it, then folded it in half twice. Jennifer came running with a roll of duct tape and cut 4 strips, each about 25 centimeters long. Paul was conscious but beginning to go into shock. Paul, stay with us, buddy, John urged. Marlon returned with a large blanket, and Brian followed. Joe returned from the kitchen, shouting that the helicopter was waiting and the hospital was a 3-minute flight from the helipad. John placed strips of duct tape across the bag of chips and told Marlon to lay out the blanket next to Paul. Okay, Sarah, lay your head down gently, then come here and keep your hand on this bag. That's it. We'll roll him over onto his side, then put a blanket under him. Then do it on the other side to completely enclose him. When this was done, John said, Sarah, keep applying pressure to the wound. Everyone else will pick him up on the count of 3, then quickly and carefully carry him outside. If you feel like you can't help yourself, say something. Let's decide whether we need to stop and get a better grip or continue. 1, 2, 3. 4 men and 3 women lifted Paul by the blanket and began to carry him to the back door. In the chaos, no one noticed that Derek and Mark had disappeared. Ashley was still in her room. The helicopter was not designed for medical evacuation, so they laid Paul on the floor in front of the rear seats. Sarah climbed up to him and continued to put pressure on the wound. John also boarded the helicopter, and Tim Waters sat in the front seat next to the pilot. The other 6 moved away from the helicopter, and the pilot shouted, "Clear the area." The helicopter took off as the first police cars arrived on the scene. Paul woke up to the sound of car horns and quickly realized where he was and what had happened. He looked to his right and saw Sarah curled up in an uncomfortable chair with a blanket draped over her shoulders. Sarah, Paul said. Sarah opened her eyes and smiled widely at Paul. Hi, handsome. She rose from her chair, walked over to Paul, and kissed him tenderly on the forehead. The doctor said you'll be fine. The knife pierced your lung. John saved your life. The bag of chips prevented air from entering your lungs. Paul, he saved your life with a damn chip bag. I don't remember much after I was hit, Paul answered in a quiet voice. Who was this guy? His name is Derek Messing. You won't believe it, but he's Mark's homosexual lover. Sarah even laughed a little when she said this. Where did he come from? It looked like he was waiting in Mark's room. I think their plan was for me to go to Mark and have an intim with both of them all night. I saw Joe attack him. Did he at least fight back? Well, there was a lot of noise. Joe had to run out and stop the helicopter. Derek escaped, and so did Mark. Sarah, I'm sorry things didn't go according to plan. Honey, everything is fine. No, look, I was a little arrogant, thinking that everything would go exactly according to plan. Stop it immediately. If you hadn't done what you did, it would have been someone else after me. I see you did this for the next girl. I love you, Paul. Never apologize for being a good person. Paul leaned back with a smile on his face. I love you too, sweetie. Did they catch them? No, they fled in Mark's BMW. At that moment, there was a knock on the door. Sarah went and opened it. Mr. Waters. Come in. Sarah, please call me Tim. How are you? I'm fine, sir. Please come in. Paul, I'll go get some coffee. I'll be back in a few minutes. Okay, sweetie. I'll be here, Paul said, trying to lighten the mood. After Sarah left, Tim sat down in the chair opposite Paul. Paul, I cannot apologize enough for the actions of Mark and that idiot Derek. Yeah, I didn't expect that, Paul replied. I'm done with him. I covered for him his whole life. I didn't know he was blackmailing female employees, but he was always doing something wrong. I guess it's time for his mother to make a choice. Tim, I noticed that you never call him your son. He's not your child, right? No, he's not mine. Tim took a deep breath and let it out with a long sigh. I tried to raise him as my own, but when he found out I was not his biological father, he showed me the minimum respect he could without me cutting him off. I knew something was wrong when he was 10 years old and 173 centimeters tall. I took a test, which confirmed it, but I still loved his mother. As strange as it may sound, she was a wonderful wife and adored me. It still remains true to this day. Did she finally confess? Not really. One Christmas, during his junior year in college, Mark and I had a huge argument. At one point, he yelled at me, "How the hell can you be my father?" Oh no, yes, he did. He did the test without my knowledge. The next time we had a fight, he threw it right in my face. His mother was devastated. I honestly don't think she knew. It turned out that when we were in Europe on vacation, I got sick and stayed in the room for a couple of days. I insisted she go and enjoy the city, and she got drunk and slept with someone for one night. She never really thought about it. We had a very active, intimate life, and she just assumed he was mine since the color of her hair and eyes matched mine. It never occurred to her that I was not his father. She never gave me any reason to suspect her of cheating. When I found out, I hired detectives and followed her for a long time, no hint of betrayal, nothing. I truly believe this was an isolated incident, a momentary loss of control. It was a one-night mistake. I'm really sorry about all this, Tim. If you'd rather I leave, I'll understand. No, Paul. I want you to stay. Moreover, I want you to play a more important role in the company. Look, I've taken up too much of your time. Call me as soon as you leave here so we can discuss your future with the company. If you don't mind, can we keep our conversation between us? Certainly. Tim, come by any time if you feel the need to talk. I'm ready to listen. Maybe I'll take you up on your offer. Do you mind if I stop by in a couple of days? Of course not. I'm already looking forward to it. Derek fled for 10 days before he was arrested in Los Angeles in Mark's BMW. He was charged with attempted murder and related crimes and ultimately received 10 years in prison. Mark was charged with attempting to blackmail and coerce Sarah. Ashley got fired and then divorced. This retreat became legendary, and no one missed it again. After that, there was never as much drama as there was that weekend, but everyone loved to talk about where they were when it happened and what they saw or thought they saw. Tim and his wife didn't get divorced, they really loved each other. However, Mark was disowned. He got a job as a car salesman in the town where he attended college. Sarah turned to a psychologist to figure out why she succumbed to the influence of Mark and Ashley. Nothing concrete came to light. She was never raped and had no problems with her father. She constantly thanked Lisa for bringing her back to reason. From then on, Sarah adored Paul as much as he adored her. Sarah tried her best to regain Paul's trust, to the point where he finally told her to stop. Listen, Sarah, there is no doubt about how I feel about you and the other man. If you needed to hear it, you heard it. Never forget this. I know guys will hit on me and flirt. I get it. If someone starts to spread their hands or directly suggests an affair, I expect you to tell me right away. That's it. End of story. No more chances. They lived happily ever after. Sarah never cheated. I know because I wrote it. What do you think of our story today? It seems to me that the conspiracy was deliberately set up by the wife and her co-workers, making it unrealistic for a husband to be married to his wife. What's your impression? Write in the comments. See you for more videos.